Welcome to Resiliency Within. I am your host, Elaine Miller-Karas, and I'm delighted to have on the show again Dr. Michael Sapp, the Chief Executive Officer of the Trauma Resource Institute. And many of you already know that I am the co-founder of the Trauma Resource Institute. So when Mike and I get to have a discussion about what we both love to do, which is kind of helping the world,
Mhm.
kind of like a big ask, isn't it, Mike?
Just something small like that.
Something
Yeah.
small. But what we wanted to do with everything that's happening in the world today, and we are both live in Southern California, we want to talk a little bit about the acts of generosity that we have heard of and we've actually witnessed in our international community and how they have been experiencing life over the last few months with all the challenges, yet with this, oh my gosh, this thread of well-being that has touched us both, I think, deeply. So we have been involved at the Trauma Resource Institute in the recovery process of those affected by the Eaton and Palisades fires. And it really has provided us an opportunity to see firsthand of how people are getting through after the devastation. We have worked in particularly with two different organizations, Los Angeles counties and Los Angeles City's Parks and Rec departments, and I think they really have inspired us to, I guess, to the words of Abraham Lincoln: kindness is the only service that will stand the storm of life and not wash out. It will wear well and will be remembered long after the prism of politeness or the complexion of courtesy has faded away. Um, as you know, I don't think that we have seen people skirting the discussion of their suffering. But I think they also have reminded us of what we have mentioned many times on this show is what else is true about these unprecedented times when we are faced with fires, wars, aggressive acts, and community violence, that we can also have a wider lens that has also provided, I think, relief to people as well as to ourselves as we've been working in the recovering process. So, Mike, as we get started today, what's on your mind?
I think related to that last point that we talk about having a broader view that when we are in distress, and I'll speak, I think this is true for most of us, knowing how the nervous system works, but I can speak for myself. When I'm in distress, my focus gets really contracted, really zeroes in on that source of threat. And when that happens, my distress tends to grow. And that's partly because it's just biological, right? That we're made to, if there's a threat there, we're made to overcome that threat just out of pure survival. And what I think we work really hard at doing is when people are in distress is to acknowledge the distress and at the same time and through offering support in whatever way we can through acts of generosity, through kindness, expand that vista, expand that view so that we can start to see other things so that the threat, while still there maybe, or that distress may still be there, it may turn down in volume. That once we're on this side of, if it's a singular event threat, if it's something, disaster, that we can start to see other elements of our experience that are also true, that enable us maybe to put one step in front of the other in a way that I might not have felt otherwise. I may, there are times where I just feel stuck. And so I just love doing the work we get to do because in the work that we're doing, we're acknowledging every aspect of our experience, and not just the distress. It's the distress and recognizing where are the strengths, where's that well-being that we can tap into, even if it's for moments, to give the nervous system a break and enable us to maybe think more clearly and engage what we need to do in a different way.
Well, and I think that one of the things I've been touched about is, and I'm going to mention Los Angeles County Parks and Rec, which I really felt very grateful to be invited to come. We've had a partnership with Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, and they reached out to us after our initial reaching out to them, and said, well, there's a need to just do some kind of aftercare for these amazing young people who, after the fires, did what was called care camps. And these care camps really cared for the children who'd been impacted by the fires. Some of the children had lost their homes, their schools. Maybe their parents had lost their businesses because, there's lots to attend to. The parents have to apply for FEMA funding. They have to find housing if they lost their homes. Many people were living in temporary shelters, yet these young people from Parks and Recs in LA County and LA City, I'll mention both of them, they were called into action, and they didn't necessarily have a lot of experience dealing with traumatic experiences, but they like kids. And even someone said, I didn't know if I could help, but they did help. And so what we were able to provide are some groups that lasted for about an hour long. And I'm saying that we had some wonderful volunteers that came out from the Trauma Resource Institute from all of LA County. And they told us, well, we think about 150 people will come. And then 240 people came. And when people started arriving in greater numbers, we said, it's okay. We'll just have bigger groups. But I think there was a certain camaraderie about everybody had been through something and people wanted to see each other and they were together, and you could see the clusters of groups like, oh, these are the lifeguards, and these are people that work at that particular Parks and Rec department, right? Because they were all over LA County. And one of the things that Parks and Rec did is they had little placards on all the tables, and the placards were statements that parents had made of really their gratitude towards the workers. And they would say, thank you so much. Your generosity towards my child meant so much to him during this most difficult time. And that was repeated how many times, Mike? Like, we saw they were all over the tables, and we're going, oh my gosh, this strength-based approach was so inspiring for us as helpers. And so what we had done, Mike and I worked together on this. We had created what we often do, and that is we had created an intervention that's based on our strength-based model, and we had a training for our volunteers before it started. And basically, it was asking a few questions to start out with. So, they had called it a debrief. Go, oh, we don't call it a debrief. These are healing gatherings because there's a different intent. So, Mike, tell them the questions that we started out with, because I think that the answers were so inspiring.
Absolutely. So one of and we always offer choice, right? We always say, hey, we're going to ask these questions. If you would like to share answer to these questions, please do. If you want to pass and you just want to listen, please do, because choice matters for us. It's very important. But the questions we opened with were, what or who has helped you get through the past few weeks? Can you remember a moment of generosity that stands out to you? And then during those camps, what activities or people helped the kids that you observed? And those were the three basic questions we asked. And I know in my group, I had a larger group of about 20. And what was so striking, I had a mix of young lifeguards, I had some librarians, I had some people that worked the registration tables when the parents would drop them off. I had some planners, people that were working behind the scenes to make sure everything was going okay. And what was striking to me with the initial responses, uh, the lifeguards were the first to go, and these were young adults. I didn't ask them their age. I know I'm going to date myself right now. They looked very young to me. But they almost all of them said what helped me get through were the people here, right here with me, that when we were there and we were doing this together, there was something about having my friends here with me, people that I didn't even know that I met during the camp, that we just supported each other. These were young men that were saying this. I remember one in particular eventually said, you know what? Um, can you remember a moment of generosity that stands out to you? And I love it. He says, we were working sometimes 13 hours a day, and I would come home and my mom would just make me a meal, and I would come home and the meal would be there for me. And it was just so sweet because this doesn't negate challenges that they had. They shared some of the challenges that they experienced and some of the things they heard about that was hard for them. But starting this way, they're tapping into that strength, that well-being, that I think helps anchor someone, so that we can then talk about some of the other things that were challenging in a better way.
Well, and I think that the other thing that was so apparent to me was that they were sharing these little these golden nuggets of generosities that they saw. And I remember one of them said to me, and it was so, when I saw this little boy, I guess they had in the beginning, they had clothing that the children could pick from when for the children who had lost their homes. And this little boy found this piece of clothing that had meaning to him. And it was like when he saw it, he just like lit up. And so then when the worker saw this, he lit up witnessing the child. And so you could see that kind of what we call that feedback loop of well-being, that because they were helping, they got so much from helping that it also nourished them to feel like with this mass destruction in LA County that they had something to do. And I have to say that I think that when we came in with our community resiliency model, that it did help them to see some things in some different ways that, they thought, oh, you're going to ask us to tell you the worst parts. Well, we said, you can tell us as little or as much as you want. And I think that was a relief for people. And also when we do groups after a disaster, we say, that some of us are quieter, that we don't want to share in a group setting, that maybe we want to talk to one person. And I said, so just know that you can just say pause when we come to you, and you don't have to say anything at all. But I think what we did see is that people knew each other so well, and that some of the groups had like 40 people in it, that when they broke them up into smaller groups, then they knew each other already. And so that these questions sparked them to think about all the ways that this help did provide a solace to the children and to the parents and the families that were, dealing with this incredible destruction. So Mike, I thought it might be helpful for those people that are listening that may not know our model. Maybe I'll say a little bit, maybe you can add to it, but the community resiliency model incorporates 6 wellness skills into daily activities, offering practical tools for self-care. It's biologically based. It's designed to support children and adults who've experienced traumatic or very highly stressful events. And what we aim to do is to reduce the distress caused by such events and foster both short and long-term adaptive functioning and coping. And the way we do this is through the nervous system. So we've kind of translated, I think, the complex neuroscience into simple, accessible concepts that enables us us and the individuals we're helping to understand these common biological and human responses to trauma. And that this knowledge helps reduce, shame and stigma often associated with traumatic experiences, and go, it's about your biology. It's not because there's any mental weakness here, right? And so I think we foster a more realistic self-appraisal in relationship to stressful events, because I think that paves the way for new and maybe constructive meanings to emerge, which I think we saw when some of the young people said, well, I found that I really could be helpful to kids. So do you want to say a little bit more about what CRIM is about, Mike?
Yeah, I think it's and I think we mentioned it a little bit earlier, is it really highlights, like you said, the biology. If our nervous system responds to stress in certain ways, then we can start to look at some of the biological uh, uh, I don't know, processes that can contribute to why we might be doing what we do, so that then it's not about, oh, I'm mentally weak, I'm a horrible person because I did this, this, and this. It's, oh, because my biology is such that it is working for my survival, I responded in this way or this way or this way. And it also, I think for me personally, and for people that I work with, in this way with, enables a framework by which to observe even other people's potential responses, right? So if we talk about, one of the key concepts is this idea of a wellness or an okay zone, our zone of well-being. And when we're in that zone, we can feel a range of emotions. We can feel sad, we can feel excited, we can feel mad, we can feel zen and peace and happy, but we can still engage activities of daily living. We can think flexibly. We can make good decisions. And when we're there, there can be a charge, there can be a release, there can be, like I said, a range of thoughts and feelings we might have. But when life happens and when things happen that knock us out of our zone, we can go into this high zone response or a low zone response. And we can just, how we phrase it, we can be out of our zone, where we might see different ways of operating when we're in our high zone, where we're maybe there's some rage and panic and pain, whereas in our low zone, it's more depressed, sad, fatigue, isolation. And being bumped in those areas that makes sense. That's going to happen. That's normal. When we get stuck there, that then can be problematic. If we're stuck in the high zone and we're really irritable and rage and we interact with people, our interactions are going to be not so good.
Right.
And when we were working in this way, like for example, I remember one of the people said one of the experiences that stood out to them was, working at the table, we'd have these parents that came in and the form that they had filled out, which was a standard form you would fill out, asked them what their address was. Well, their house just burned down and they're like, why would you ask me my address? What are you gonna, you can't send anything that, and they got really, really
Ed.
mad.
Yeah.
And so for them to hear this and go, oh, those people were out of their zone. They weren't, this isn't personal, it's biology. It provides for me especially, and what I've talked with other people about, it provides an added level of compassion that can be present when people are out of their zone. If I have that formulation, if I have that idea in my head is, oh, when they're going through these situations, they may be out of their zone high, they may be out of their zone low. I have when I this model for me and that framework has just made a huge difference for me in how I can interact and respond and engage people, especially in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, because it can be hard, not only for them, but also for me, right? I have to notice what's my response in working with people who are suffering, because I know from a biological standpoint that I may start to tune, my nervous system may start to tune to their nervous system. So if someone's out of tune, if someone's out of their zone, I may get pulled in that direction depending on that interaction.
Well, and it would be natural for some people to be out of their zone, right?
Right.
Absolutely. So that's something that we see as a common biological response. And I think it's important for people to know that there has been some research. So when people have experienced like a traumatic event post-disaster, oftentimes people report that their nervous system is, like, to use an indelicate term, jacked up. So what does that
Mhm.
mean? They're in sympathetic hyperarousal. So the heart rate is faster. Maybe they feel tense muscles. They're not taking deeper breaths. It's more shallow breaths. And if you do that for a while, it feels uncomfortable. You don't feel like yourself. And so for most people, they'll go back into that zone of well-being, but there are some folks that they'll stay jacked up like that. And you can only stay up there so long because really you've got the adrenaline pumping, and you need that when there's an immediate disaster. But then people will dive down in what we call the low zone, which some people call it the adrenaline dump. And then they're feeling like, oh, I am exhausted, fatigued. There's a cloud over my eyes. I can't do anything. And we were experiencing that to a degree, but we worked on that well-being. And I think what's so important and what I loved about the care camps is that we know when children are bumped out of their zone, it helps to move the body. Because if you're in that higher low zone, guess what? Moving the large muscles of the body helps to down regulate if you're in the high zone and up regulate if you're in the low zone. So that really is something that's about well-being. And, we say about community resiliency model, there's a set of skills and interventions that can lead to well-being and mental health. But the way that they're designed is really about helping the body stabilize and, like you're saying, come back into that state of well-being. And, we'll do simple things. We have these strategies that, we often use at disasters that are called Help Now. There's about 10 different strategies, but many of you may know about these strategies because you've used them themselves, that say, would it be helpful if we just get up and move and stretch or maybe walk around the building? Sometimes when I got a lot of anxiety when this is happening, if I push against the wall, really push as hard as I can against the wall, it's like it's letting that anxiety go out into the hemisphere, not back into me. Do you want a drink of water? Or what? Wow. Well, let's look around the room. What catches your eye? Look at that beautiful, sunset that we can see right now. Or can you hear? Oh my gosh, I think I can hear the birds singing. Can you hear that? Right. So we can help people to stabilize their nervous system by, again, reminding them to do other things that can help bring them back into that zone of well-being. So are there specific things that you've found too, Mike, that can be helpful besides the
Oh,
questions and the help now strategies to reset now?
yeah, I think we've found helpful stuff like grounding, right? One of our skills is grounding and just paying attention to our body making contact with the surface of support. To me, it's a very simple definition. It's a very easy to learn practice, but sometimes kind of hard to do. And so what I've noticed sometimes, and I see it in when we work in this way, when we can start to ask questions like this, sometimes, the questions like what or who has helped you get through the past few weeks, as they start to talk about that, I start to notice that their nervous system may be coming back into their zone a little bit more. And as they do that, sometimes I'll see them shift in their seat, or I notice they move their feet. And so sometimes I could just say, "Oh, I noticed that you moved your feet. Do you notice your feet on the ground now?" I mean, those are things I can fold in conversationally that can sound, I will just say it, can sound very weird because it's not normal discourse that you would hear someone say. But to be able to say, for some people who may be having trouble, maybe asking those questions, they have a really hard time coming up with something. Well, nothing's really helping me. I don't know. And because maybe they're still out of their zone. To do those help now strategies, I find to be really effective. And then looking for moments, because there's something about grounding for certain people in certain situations that I think have been really helpful for them to just notice their feet on the ground. As simple as that.
Well, and I think that what we've seen post-disaster is that many times, because of how big the disaster was, and certainly the fires in LA were that, but so the floods in North Carolina and the hurricanes in Florida and the southern part of the United States, is that people really feel like they're off kilter, physiologically off kilter. People have told me, I feel like everything's spinning around me, or like I feel like the earth is not is moving. And that can happen with a hurricane or earthquake and even the fires. So when we do grounding exercises to bring your attention to the present moment, it's like, oh, swoosh, I'm back in. So feeling your feet on the ground. But I think we've also seen where sometimes just putting something heavy on the lap,
Yep.
because then it has that weightedness of going, oh, okay, yeah, I can now feel myself in the chair. And we'll see a deeper breath come in, and the person gets a little snippet of their well-being. And then when they get there, we sometimes they'll might say, when you ask me that question, what's helping me, I really realize that there's been so many moments of generosity that surprised me. And I've been calling those nourishing moments.
Mm-hmm.
When we have those nourishing moments and we can shift to, it gives us a break
Yeah.
from all well, I've been calling it the chaos soup, right, that we may be living in right now.
Yeah.
And so that has been an important element of, I think, what we've been experiencing as we've had the honor to respond, to the fires. And I think the other thing I'd say, and maybe we can talk a little bit this without revealing the name of the schools, but there's a couple of different schools, two school districts that have asked us to come in to help their counselors, to give them a lens of how do you help after disasters, because we really have developed an expertise. For those that don't know about what we've done, I have to say 20 years ago, I was with another organization invited to Thailand. And that changed my life because I saw that when we worked with the body, we could help people get back into that zone of well-being very quickly. And from that experience, myself and another person named Jeannie Everett created what we called a short-term model of being able to take something with very simple skills and principles into disasters and teach the frontline responders very simply, then that could help more people. We could scale it. And right now, I think that you and I guess we could say we're concerned in Los Angeles and other places that have mass disasters. I can say to you, I'll ask you this question, Mike, are there enough mental health providers to deal with the mental health, really aftermath of the
No.
fires? No.
No. And not only are there not enough, even if there were, I still go back to this, and I'm a psychologist. Even if there were enough psychologists, social workers, therapists to help and have people have access to, not everybody wants to access those services. We know that from stigma, from any number of reasons. There could be any number of reasons. And so even
I hate to say this to you, not everybody, every community, every culture is psychologically oriented.
and even if they are, they may not want to go see a psychologist because of,
Exactly.
right? And so
Or a
yes,
social worker like me, right?
right,
Yes.
absolutely. So the idea of this is why I get so passionate about this, the idea of equipping and being able to equip natural leaders in community. Anybody can learn these skills. Anybody can share these skills with anybody and teach them how to use them for self-care, for care of others. That's what's exciting to me because it doesn't require letters behind your name.
Right. It doesn't. And I think that's why one of the things that I want to share with people at this moment, we'll talk about the schools after the break, but is we have a free iChill app. iChill. And go to, if you have a smartphone, you can go and you can download it. It's free. It's in English, Spanish, Ukrainian, Arabic, and Hebrew. At this point, we're going to be adding French, Japanese, Portuguese. We have in the works to add more languages since we've updated our platform. And people can then learn the skills. They can listen to the skills that can take them through a wellness practice that can help people when we've left the scene, right? And that's been an important, I think, reinforcer of the work that we've been doing. And I know that you've worked very closely with making sure, Mike, that iChill is operationalized. I always have much gratitude to you about that.
Well, and I think, and I want to be careful because that's such a wonderful tool for me. I've used it as a clinician. I use it as a human being. I've shared it with others, and I want to be careful not to imply that it's an either or thing, that we either train professional mental health clinicians or, right? It's both. It's how do we expand the network of people that can help. And this is what I love about it is that we have this app that can help support all 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 helpers, natural
Okay.
leaders to professional mental health clinicians. I mean, it's all of the above.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because we say this often, we all have a nervous system.
right.
It operates the same way where it can get out of kilter after something like this, but we know there are ways that we can pay attention to bring ourselves back into that zone of well-being so that we can manage the chaos soup, as I've been
Yeah.
calling it of late. So, Mike, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, let's talk a little bit about working with the schools and the school counselors and some of the lessons learned and also what people might want to be aware of. But also, I think I'd like to invite you to talk a little bit about what we've been invited to do
Hmm.
that we're hoping will get funded for the wider Los Angeles community.
Yep, we'll do.
So we'll be back in just a minute or so, and we'll hear from our sponsor, the Trauma Resource Institute. Welcome back. I'm here with Dr. Michael Sapp from the Trauma Resource Institute, and we are talking about the Trauma Resource Institute's response to the horrible Eaton and Palisades fires. And they have been working very closely with recovery. And one of the areas that they have worked with, and I'm going to ask Mike to tell us a little bit more about that, is working with schools. And I don't think we have to name the schools for the
Right.
confidentiality, but let's talk a little bit about the kind of work that we've done.
Sure, sure. So in most of these cases, we've been invited in to share a brief orientation of the types of skills that we use. And when I say brief, I mean I think one of them invited us for like 20 minutes to kind of share what we do and then provide added support as necessary. And so with one in particular, we were invited back to meet with some of their staff individually, and then also offer a more robust, if I could say more robust, if an hour is more robust than 20 minutes, another um, opportunity to share a little bit more detail about the models and about the skills and why they can be really helpful. And then in other situations, we've had a little bit more time to present some of those skills. And anytime we present the skills, they are skills. So it's not like we just get up there and talk about them. We share the basics, and then we provide opportunities for them to do little experiential exercises so that they can see what it feels like in their nervous system to experience changes and shifts in their nervous system, where they may experience more well-being.
Well, and I think the other thing I want to say about when there's a big disaster, because when we've been meeting with some of the teachers and counselors from the different schools, is that we'll have these half an hour sessions where Mike and I will set aside to speak to them individually, privately, because there's a lot going on. And the other thing is like life happens.
Yeah.
Someone's mom may be dying. They're worried about their child who may have a mental health condition, and all the things that get exacerbated as a result of of these kinds of disasters. And I think the one question, Mike, that I want to share, and I'm thinking about one wonderful teacher that I spoke to. I said, well, can you remember when you knew that your family had survived? And she said, oh, I remember because my next door neighbor, she'd gotten my dog, and my son was at his school, and then my husband, he was in another part of Los Angeles, and then we all got together, and I remember seeing my neighbor's car and seeing our dog, and there was my son and my husband and myself, and that moment was such an incredible moment of joy that we were all together, and relief. So there actually can be that sense of joy and relief when there's also, the immense suffering that's happening. And so asking that question about, well, when did you know, that you and your family were safer? That moment is an existential moment that is often filled with such relief and oftentimes tears. And we call those sweet tears, right? It's not that they taste sweet, but that the person feels better, that they've had that expression of emotion. And I also want to say that we've talked a lot about emotions and tears, and we want every single person to know um, that it is really important that tears come, and no matter what your gender is, because tears help to release some of the pressure in the nervous system. And what happens if you notice the warmth and the wetness of the tears, oftentimes you go right into a deeper breath. We're designed to cry as human beings. So we were not designed to shut it down. And so to also let children know, if you're an adult listening to this program, that you may see mommy and daddy cry. You may see your teacher cry right now because something's happened to all of us, and tears are fine. And you know what? If you want to cry, it's okay for you to cry too. So we want to reinforce that with the children. And that's, I think, one of the things that we've learned in working with the schools, Mike. Is there anything else that stands out with working in the schools with you for any of the families that and the teachers and counselors that we've spoken to?
I think the challenge of comparative grief is
Yes.
that right. I've heard people utilize that term, but that sense of, well, I didn't have as much loss as that person over there. They lost their home. I didn't lose my home, but so I feel like I can't complain about the fact that my commute to my to this work is now 2 hours there and back versus 45 minutes, and so they are impacted, but maybe not in the same way. And it doesn't mean that the impact, that even though they didn't quote unquote lose their home, it doesn't mean that the impact of other people's sorrow and grief doesn't also impact them, right? So I think it's that comparative grief, that sense of, oh, I I can't verbalize the things that are challenging for me because compared to that person, I have it good. And I know we hear that over. I just remember hearing that over and over and over in many different disaster responses. And we work really hard at trying to communicate. Yes, some people have lost this, some people have lost this. It doesn't negate the impact and what it feels like on our own nervous system when there are things that have impacted us, even though it may, if we compare it in any way, it may on the outside look like it should be uncomparable. But on our nervous system is responding the way it's responding,
100%, right? It's 100%.
right?
Well, and I think the other thing that we've learned, and I want to say a little bit about this because of being an Angelino myself, is that there's people that said, oh, well, those people out in the Palisades, they're all rich. They're going to do much better than the people that in the Eaton fire, because they were more of a middle class, working class neighborhoods. And that can be true. But also to know that there are all sorts of folks that lived in the Palisades. And even if you have all the money in the world, does not mean that you won't suffer. And I think that, when we talk about the Trauma Resource Institute, what do we say, Mike? Compassion without borders.
Yep.
That's also compassion without looking at the bottom line about, well, how much money did you make and how much did you lose? But also to realize that when you are living in Los Angeles County, people can have generational wealth. They may be a teacher, they may be a plumber, an electrician, they may have jobs that have been working class or middle class jobs, but their parents bought their house in the Palisades 50 years ago, And, who would have known that the prices would have gone up so exponentially, not only in the Palisades, but also in Altadena. So if you were a homeowner, you may have lost everything because your savings were in your house that is no longer there. And that's another thing about not comparing losses or where you lived in Los Angeles County, that people are suffering, I think, equally, even though there may be people that have means in terms of being able to get into housing quicker, which I think is true. And I don't want to also not acknowledge that, as well as there
Sure.
are people that are finding it very difficult to find housing. And some people have moved out of Los Angeles. And I think one of the schools that we worked with, which I thought was very dear, they had a
Mhm.
picture of the classroom, and the kids wanted to know, well, where's my buddy? And so when they found out, well, that child is in San Diego now, that child moved to New York, that child moved to the Bay Area, that child is in Santa Barbara, that they were able to give a context to the children. Because remember, kids at different development ages, if they don't see their friend and then they know there's been a disaster, they may think, oh, my friend died in the fires. So helping children understand that people moved, and people may have moved even within Los Angeles County. Like, I think didn't someone tell us that there was one school in Orange County that had 50 kids
Mhm.
from either Altadena or the Palisades, or maybe both, that had come into their schools. So that's a lot of children
Yeah.
that have been displaced.
Yep.
So I think that we've learned different folds that are happening
Yeah.
that are also impacting communities. Um, so I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, Mike.
Yeah, I just think that's it. I think uh, going back to what you said in the very beginning, compassion without borders. I don't like seeing anybody suffer. And so what can we do? And and I think that's the piece that I keep coming back to is if someone's suffering, what can I do? And I think traditionally I used to, as a psychologist, used to think, oh, I just got to be present and let them just vent and talk and talk and talk. And that can help for some people. But we also know that just talking about the worst parts of the losses, the worst parts of the grief can also dysregulate the nervous system and make our nervous system think, oh, I'm back in it. And so sometimes this is what I love about working in this way is sometimes asking this question allows us to reset our nervous system so that then if we do want to talk about that stuff, it can feel less distressing. Or if it starts to get really distressing, we can swing back, talk about those things that really gave us strength and then go back in. And I just feel like working in this way, tapping into that well-being is a way of anchoring the nervous system because we know that when the nervous system is out of its zone, our ability to think and make decisions is compromised. And so I think about that for kids when they go into school, even though they may not have lost the house, but they are impacted by any number of things. Maybe it's their parents having conversations about the losses, even though they were trying to protect them from that. They go into school system or into their classes, and maybe their nervous system's not quite regulated, so they're learning less. They're not able to think and concentrate. Same with adults having to make decisions, having to find the services that they need, having to fill out paperwork. That can be so dysregulating. And so if we can use these, if we can help someone come back in their zone enough to turn down the distress enough so that they can do the things that they need to do.
And
That's
move the journey of applying for FEMA and they're
right.
calling their insurance company,
Moving from hotel room to hotel room to hotel room, right?
right. I think the other thing that I think is important is that the Trauma Resource Institute, we've worked internationally. We've worked very much within our own country. And I think that I want to say that anyone who's listening, we've seen where communities like Wilmington, North Carolina, they had a training. I did a short introduction. They did a training and created 30 community resiliency model teachers. They have many more than that now. But maybe, Mike, talk a little bit about what that community has done, because I think we could certainly do that in Los Angeles as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was prompted by, right, like you said, this what I often will refer to as like this singular event, this Hurricane Florence, that then when we provided a CREM teacher training, we equipped and trained people in this teacher training. It's a train the trainer model to be CREM teachers that then can go out into their community, into their organizations, and train others in using the skills for self-care and other care. And what they started to do is they adopted CREM into their public employees, government employees training. And so that every person that was hired in as a government employee or right, a county employee, sorry, would take an hour orientation about the skills. So it's orienting them to the community resiliency model skills, creating a common language for the workplace, but also providing a tool that could help them. And then if they want to do a deeper dive, someone can say, yes, I want to learn more about this particular model. And then they could take a longer training to do a deeper dive. And then eventually, as they would accumulate more and more need for more and more trainers or teachers, they would do another teacher training. But what happened is it created a common language. It gave them skills so that then when the next hurricane came, they would send out emails to each other. Hey, remember the skills, remember this, so not only is it a safety, not only was it about their safety and making sure they're safe physically, but it was also a reminder of what they can do for their emotional and mental health to stay in their zone enough, and to recover quicker, in the wake of the disaster. And so so we know that in that area, that will not be the only hurricane, that will not be the last hurricane, and that there are, and then also that there are other issues beyond those singular event disasters that these skills can work for. I think you alluded to that earlier, Elaine, where there's community challenges that were there prior to the event, they're there after the event.
Well, and I think the other thing, we've seen the same thing in Butte County because we responded to the Paradise fires, and there's a group up there that have actually responded to more fires. They feel they're equipped. In fact, some of them have been consultants to schools down here in Los Angeles, because of their CRIM training. And I think that's what's important about that. I think that we've created in the Trauma Resource Institute, we call it Dream CRIM, Disaster Relief Management, the community resiliency model. We really have a means to scale the well-being skills. And there is a little formula that was created by the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute that says that if you can change 10% of the population to believe something, let's say to believe that well-being is possible by using the community resiliency model, which I think is what they did in Wilmington. And I think they have more than their 10%, that it changes the rest. And so, I mean, that is a very wonderful feedback loop, right? That if we can help 10% of an organization, a group of people say, oh yeah, I think wellness, I can sense that inside of me when I think of what's helping me get through, or, oh my gosh, those acts of generosity. Oh, the deep breath. But we know that we have a generosity circuit in our brain that when we witness acts of generosity or someone's generous towards us, or we're generous towards someone, that we are actually pouring water on our well-being, and that's spreading within ourselves. And like that feedback loop, like you were talking about earlier, if we're distressed, people can often feel our distress, but if we're well, oh, well, I can take some of that well-being and I can go to the FEMA office now because I've got to be in my zone of well-being to be able to fill out all that paperwork or whatever it may be that is in front of you. So maybe, speak a little bit that I know we felt very honored, the Trauma Resource Institute, to be contacted by some leaders in Los Angeles. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been working on with that grant?
Yeah, sure. We've been invited to present a proposal that really, at its core, is about trying to really build and implement a scalable solution, for recovery, for mental health, and well-being at the population level, right? So how can we, when something like this event happens, how can we have a structure in place that people can go to and be connected, a network of organizations that can be connected, that can then provide preventative strategies, not only preventative strategies, but also help communities respond and recover from future disasters. So it was almost referred to as a recovery or resilience hub. And so we've been invited to provide a proposal on what could that look like, specific to LA in response to the Palisades and Eaton fire and Hearst fire. And so what we are looking to do is identify what that can be. What could a hub look like when people reach out to, if something like this were to happen again, people could reach out to this hub and be connected with organizations that may be trained in the community resiliency model that could then provide their services from a trauma-informed, resiliency-focused perspective and incorporate those in the skills in the way they provide their services. any different number of services? How can we build the preventative piece? How do we help children? I love this proposal because it targets, hey, could we look at some of the ways that we know are helpful for children to recover? Sport, music, art, dance and movement, and how could we incorporate and train natural leaders within those various areas, whether it be the Boys and Girls Club, whether it be ASO coaches, whether it be music instructors in these skills, that they could use their skills and the modality in which they offer support and help infused with skills like CREM that can help provide a more trauma-informed, resiliency-focused uh, perspective.
And I think the other part of the proposal is also not forgetting our elders and
Yep.
people that have disabilities. If we look at the fire, sadly, there are a number of people with disabilities as well as elders that could not maneuver outside of their house. And so how can we support them now? How can we also maybe helping them be in that zone of well-being again to create better plans? If this was to happen again, how do I get out of my house? Who do I call? I mean, there are people working within our entire country, including LA County, on how to respond perhaps in a better way of how we can get support, but also how can we deal with the mental health fallout that's happened. People may have more fear about, well, gosh, no one came for me. And how do we help that person increase their well-being when that sort of thing has happened? So when we wrote the proposal, it was not only for youth, but it was also for elders and people with disabilities, and also talking about different communities. At TRI, we have a very broad group of people that represent different ethnic and religious backgrounds. And we know that with the Eaton fire, for example, there was a rich African-American community that had really been there at a time when African Americans were not welcomed in all parts of Los Angeles. It was robust and amazing, and many of the African Americans lost their homes. And so how can we provide support to them in terms of the rebuilding and also the psychological fallout from our diverse community resiliency model teachers that represent their community as well? And Mike, I want you to say a little bit about libraries, because Altadena, they just had, I think was it yesterday or today that they had the opening of the library. I think LeVar Burton was there, but that's important. And we have talked to librarians from Altadena, and God bless them, because boy, are they the first line of defense when there are disasters. And when there's mental health challenges, people go into libraries, right?
Right. And that's really the third prong, if you will, of this proposal, right? Children, adults in these different categories, and then frontline, what we would call frontline workers. That often, when I say frontline, I think, oh, we're talking about first responders, healthcare, law enforcement, and that can include that. But we also recognize, like you said, Elaine, different just expanding that definition, because public librarians are really frontline workers. Teachers in classrooms and are frontline workers. So how can we help support those frontline workers? And the public libraries, I remember we have a long history of working with LA County Public Library system came to us years ago. And I remember at the time, this is me being naive way back when, I remember when they said, yeah, we'd like to be trained. I thought, huh, why? Like in my head, I'm like, well, what? I don't understand. But when they would explain, just like you said, that so many interactions are with people that are marginalized, that aren't often cared for and overlooked, and those are the people that will that some of the people that often come into libraries and are seeking to get on a computer that they may not have access to at their home, all of those things, and they have maybe some mental health challenges. And so the workers in these public libraries said, we need skills not only for our own help because we have challenging interactions on a daily basis, but also how can we help those? And I always remember that going, oh, that's so, what a compassionate way of thinking of doing the work that they're doing, that I just was so naive and didn't think about. But ever since then going, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. And so the fact that, we had the Eaton Public Library asked for us to provide them with some papers, some handouts that we provided that they're making available that kind of share the skills, remind people about the IHLAP, and the potential for helping train public libraries. Again, if we're going to create this network, this hub where we can share resources and empower a community as large as LA County, to be able to do so with the various different sectors that have touch points with community members, I think libraries makes perfect sense to me, among others.
And Mike, we also talked that we talk about our international response, and I'm realizing that we have talked, we've had a lot to talk about the Los Angeles fires. So can I invite you to come back in a week or two so we can talk about the international response and how
Absolutely.
we've also been working with the definite blow that US aid pulling out of so many countries is causing. But I think most importantly, also talk a little bit about how people are responding. And I mean, it's been very difficult for them. Yet I think we've been part of trying to figure out some strategies of how we can bring crim skills into some areas, even though the funding is not the same.
Yeah,
So would you come back and we can talk
absolutely.
about that more in detail? Because I know we have projects in many parts of the world right
Hmm.
now. Angola, we have parts that are going to be starting in in Goma DNR. Um, I mean DRC. I don't know why I always say DNR, DRC,
Yeah.
and also some work with refugee populations, and also in Gaza and Israel. So we want to
And
see,
Belfast.
and Belfast. Oh my goodness, not to say a few. I'm sure there's more that I'm
Yeah.
missing out because we've talked to many people. But I also want to say we've also been working with our Ukrainians, and we will be working with helping some of the displaced Ukrainians in LA County that also may have been displaced because of the fires, because we've had a big project in Ukraine. So Mike, if
And,
people, go ahead.
and ongoing support for folks that we've trained in Haiti with, yeah.
So Mike, can you let us know if people are listening going, I need to find out from my community how to get community resiliency model teachers and maybe workshops going. What is the best way to contact the Trauma Resource Institute?
Sure. You can either visit us online at our website, thetraumaresourceinstitute.com. You can also email us at hello, HELLO, at the word community, TRI.com. So hello at communitytri.com. Those would be the two main ways of contacting us and letting us know if you would want us to reach out to you and help support you in any way.
Well, and also kind of want to end with a story from one of our crim
Mhm.
teachers, Susan Reedy. Susan lives in Arcadia area, and she's had people living at her house who lost their fires and knows many people. But she shared a story. She went to Kenya last year, and the Kenyans that she had met through this, I think, church associated group that she went out to, they heard about the fires. They had a gathering, and they had a calling for people that literally have very little in their lives. And I guess about 200 people, she said, showed up,
Mhm.
and they had a ceremony that was about healing for Los Angeles, and they raised $5,000. And she started crying as she was telling the story. She goes, because Elaine, these people have very little, and they actually raised $5,000 to send to Los Angeles from Kenya. So I think that is an act of generosity. I'm just even telling you it. I have tears in my eyes. So I think that is what we see universally, is acts of generosity and kindness. We talked about kindness in our description, but I want to just say that what we see is kindness, kindness, kindness. Sometimes what we hear in the press is hateful, hateful, hateful.
Yeah.
But when we're actually boots on the ground, the kindness is absolutely amazingly, overwhelmingly beautiful and amazing. So for all of you listening, remember what else is true in your life. Remember those acts of generosity. Remember what's helping you get through right now. And yes, we're living in some chaotic times, but there is a lot of good things going on in the world that are trying to help us all heal and come and be there as our best selves. So this is Elaine Miller-Karas with a deep bow to Mike Sapp, my dear friend and colleague. And thank you very much for coming and being part of Resiliency Within. Until we meet again.